And there we are. I see we got us all in our proper little Hollywood squares, so we're ready to get started. Thanks, Tracy, for that. Hey, everybody watching, listening, welcome to the very first installment in a brand new series of live streams from the Oil and Gas Global Network. This one is sponsored by the folks at Power Advocate, and it is called The Search for ROI. This is actually one of several new live streams. So if you tuned into our Here and Now event a few weeks ago, you saw that we are launching a bunch of new podcasts, a bunch of new live streams. This is one of them, and this is the very first one. So this is like the pilot. So we'll see how you guys do. And if we survive this one, we'll do another one. This is called The Search for ROI. Today, we are going to talk, we're going to talk about mergers and acquisitions in the oil and gas industry, which is a really big topic. And we've only allocated 6 hours for this session. So it's just 1 hour for the session. So what we're going to kind of hone in on today with our panel of really smart people is we want to focus on what happens after the deal, right? Because there's a lot of news and speculation that goes into what's the next right move and who's buying who, and there's all sorts of exciting strategy around all that. But when it's done, you have this group of people who need to go figure out how to make these companies and all these operations work together, and you have to be able to drive value quickly. Otherwise, people start to wonder, why did we do this? So that's what we're going to focus on today. I have three great panelists. Let's do a little intro here before we get into the topic. So I'm going to start with I guess it's in everybody's lower left hand Hollywood square, Aman, Venkat, and thank you for being with us. This is your first one with us, right? So yes. we're gonna be nice to you. I know that you are the CEO of Spark Thoughts. And I know you're here in Houston with the rest of us. So we're all actually in Houston. And I know you got a background in management consulting. You got some big names on your roster as far as your clients over there. I also know that you speak 4 languages. So if you want to mix it up during the session, the rest of us will just try to keep up with whatever it is you're saying. But what else? Tell us a little bit more about your background.
Sure. So Spark Thought, we do knowledge management consulting. And yes, I do speak 4 languages, and I will throw some curveballs in there, and let's see if you can really pick up some of the jokes in there. Why not?
Perfect. All right. Then cutting across the screen to the upper right, we have my old friend, George Danner. George, I think if you look on your LinkedIn, it says that you're the chief data scientist for Validor Partners now, but I know you from way back with Business Laboratory, and you're also an author and a speaker, and my favorite thing, which is a futurist. So what else? What did I leave out?
I think that's it. I'm a simple mathematician. That's all I am, Michael.
Perfect. A simple mathematician. I will tell you that I've seen the work that George does, and there's nothing simple about it. And then so somebody left the back door open, and Mark LaCour snuck into this panel. So Mark, of course, is the founder and chief editor of the Oil and Gas Global Network. It all started with his podcast, Oil and Gas This Week. Mark, is there anything else special you want to say?
I like how you can't remember my title. That's how important I am. Right?
Yeah.
But it's okay. Totally okay. Yeah, no, just super happy to be here. It's great that we're able to take this platform and help educate our audience. So just ready to get into the meat of this.
Okay. All right, great. All right, so let's get into the meat. I thought we would start off with maybe just talk about the landscape in the industry, because mergers and acquisitions are very much in the limelight right now. Everybody's talking about an industry in transition, an industry under pressure. Not only in terms of transition to the new energy, but even the traditional business is undergoing huge changes. So, Mark, that's kind of that's in your wheelhouse. Can you comment a little bit on what's going on in the industry? Why is M&A such a big deal right now?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So we've had this unique set of circumstances slap the industry in the face in the last couple of years. So we had our double black swan event of 2020, where we had both low crude price, actually negative crude prices for a little while, but a huge decrease in global demand for refined products. Also, you have investors starting to worry about capital efficiency. For the longest time, investors were pumping cash into the oil and gas industry looking for growth, but not necessarily looking for profitability. Well, that's not, there's an endpoint in that, right? And we've hit that endpoint. So now investors are looking for return on their investment, not for growth. And then you combine that with the change in demands and public perception for things like hydrocarbons and renewable energy. And we're in this unique situation where companies that really either intentionally played their cards well and watched their balance sheets and didn't overextend themselves in positions to pick up companies that didn't play their cards well, and they're able to now pick up assets for pennies on the dollar. And so it's fascinating to watch. And even some of the big tech companies, right, who normally you wouldn't think would play a role in mergers and acquisition, oil and gas, are playing a role in that. So it's just this unique circumstance, this almost perfect storm that's come together that is driving the M&A activity, and it will continue for a while.
Yeah, it seems like the focus has shifted from, from, as you said, growth, finding new reserves. Where's the next big finds? And the focus is more on how do we get more value out of what we have? How do we reshape our portfolio, add assets, decommission things? I think this is being covered pretty well in a lot of the consulting, like the big consulting articles and things, talking about, I think one of them is using the term, the portfolio of the future. So a lot of hustling going on to figure out what that portfolio looks like. But it does make me think that, mergers and acquisitions are not anything new in the oil and gas industry. So it seems like we know how to do this, and yet it does seem like right now there's a lot of moving parts. It's more complex. And I know, George, when we start talking about trying to figure out complicated, complex problems, this is your sweet spot. So what is it? Is there something about the scenario today or the landscape today that's making it more difficult than what it has been in the past for companies to execute this stuff?
Well, Michael, you touched on it earlier in your remarks, and it really boils down to one word, and that's complexity. Yes, we have seen mergers and acquisitions in the oil and gas industry for decades now, and we've done it, and many of them have been successful, a few not. But the difference today is exactly as you described, all the moving parts. And those of you in our audience who have been at ground zero in some of these mergers and acquisitions know very well, if you've been part of a merger integration team or something like that, you've had a front row seat on how many different ways you can stitch two companies together, or right, two or more companies together. There's an infinite number of ways, and what these companies are searching for is the optimal way to put companies together. And you're talking about putting supply chains together. You're talking about putting IT services together, shared services, the new capital allocation schemes. I mean, all of that is now subject to play. So that's really what's the new thing, is the sheer level of complexity. Now, fortunately, we have some technological tools. We could talk about that a little bit later, but we do have some things that offset that complexity. But the landscape, the backdrop against which you're trying to put two or more companies together is just so, there's so much uncertainty. There's so many different plausible futures out there for us to deal with. Right.
And kind of going back to what Mark said, the stakes are higher, right? It's the investment community has much higher expectations. So the stakes are higher, there's less time, and it's just a lot more pressure to, you don't, and if you make the wrong move, boy, it's really there's a lot at risk, right? So
could be fatal.
Yeah, it could be. And so, so that's good. So thanks. I think that I'm thinking about, so you mentioned the complexity and all of these things going into it. And I think about, well, okay, so Aman, you mentioned you work in knowledge management. There's when we go through these M&A processes, you're out there with people kind of on the front lines, right? So what are they scrambling to find? What are they looking for? What kind of data or information are they trying to get and put together and make sense of? And what do you find is really surfacing that they're trying to do?
Well, there are two parts. So the first part, we normally get brought in to kind of evaluate, during the deal. And then once the deal is done, post-deal scenarios, we have kind of an inventory process where we have to go in and just kind of look at where we're at and do a gap analysis. And today we live in a data sprawl age. So, there's information everywhere. And most likely companies have silos working against them, and there's knowledge kind of trickled throughout the organization. So there's implicit knowledge. That's a kind of knowledge that's difficult to transfer to another person by means of writing down or verbalizing it. And as opposed to a codified or explicit knowledge, which you might have a knowledge management system, manual processes, plans, procedures, or records to show. And their people and culture, they're normally misaligned at organizations, especially when you're bringing 2 or more companies together. So a lot of times what we go in and do is trying to unify and synergize those efforts and use strategies to kind of bring those 2 elements together. Yeah. Right.
Good. So if I were to sum up everything we just covered, what we have is an industry that is going through that has a lot of pressure to reshape itself in various ways because of the economics, and so that's shifting the focus to something different. That something different isn't really different. It's not completely new to us, but the complexities are much higher than they have been in the past, and the stakes are higher, and the need for speed is greater and value. And in the middle of all that, what we've discovered is that this age-old problem that we have in this industry of, not really knowing where the data is or how to put it, like we still haven't completely solved our data and information management problem that's been kind of like hindering us all these years. So you put all that together, and now it's even more difficult because of the speed at which things are changing. So did I miss anything? Anybody? Is that the landscape? Any other comments on that before we move on?
Well, one more thing, and one of the biggest challenges when an M&A occurs is people leave, right? And when people leave, out goes years of knowledge and experience with them without it being captured before.
Fortunately, they often come back as contractors, so it's not so bad. But no, it's true that there's that leaves a huge gap. So Mark, you had something?
No, I was just gonna say that it's a very complex process, and it's a complex process that's moving, right? So in order to get it right, the experience of the people that are doing the M&A is probably one of the most important things, because they've seen it and they've done it before.
Yeah, sure. Okay, good. All right. Anything else landscape-wise, what we're dealing with? George, any more insights? I know George, you work with other industries as well. Is there anything about what's happening in our industry today that is maybe analogous, and I want to get into this a little bit more later, but is there anything when you look at what's happening to us that you go, this makes me think of this other problem that I solved?
Well, you touched on something earlier about the data problem. Data has always been a bit of an issue when it comes to doing analysis and using that analysis to drive a better M&A kind of outcome. You're right to point out that data is a challenge, but I'll also say that and particularly in the oil and gas industry, that has gotten better, much better, in the last 5 to 10 years. I remember in the older era, we were completely stymied from doing a lot of the analysis that we wanted to do because we simply didn't have access to the data. That has gotten much better. And you're asked about other industries. I think other industries put a lot of effort, money, resources, time into cleaning their data house, if you want to call it that. Oil and gas industry has been a little bit late to that party, but they're catching up rapidly. So the data picture is improving rapidly, and that's going to pay benefits when we get down to the point where we're doing the analysis. Data is the fuel for any kind of scientific investigation. So the more data we have in the right format, the better off we're going to be.
Right. Yeah. No, it's good news. It's good to know that we're making progress. Of course, we have, we talk about data, we talk about knowledge. I mean, you mentioned that, implicit knowledge, things that are in people's heads, which of course in this industry, this industry is built on decades of people who know how to do certain things in certain ways. And, I don't care what your clipboard says. This is how this works. So I think we're going to get to that in a minute. But so we just painted this picture of this huge mountain that says, guess what? It's really hard and good luck. So let's talk about in the face of all of that complexity and all those challenges, where do you start? So if I want to, let's say I'm in an operational role, leadership role, or financial leadership role, or something like that. And, we've just merged or been acquired or whatever the scenario is. And there's so much to do, and you can't just run around and start just doing everything at once. You got to figure out where do I start? How do I move this forward? And how do I really start to drive value quickly, because all eyes are on us to see if this merger or this transaction produces the value that was intended. So George, I'm going to come back to you for a second, because I know you love models and simulations. And so the question I have for you is, what is the average airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow? Now, I've always wanted to ask somebody. I've always wanted to
African or European swallow.
African or European swallow. That's right. That's the right response. No, what? All right. So how does modeling? So we have all this complexity. We need to know where to start. We need to kind of know where we're going. How does modeling play into all this? What can you do in that regard to get things going?
Well, think about it, Michael. What are we doing here? We're taking the ingredients from company A and the ingredients from company B, and we're creating this third company which doesn't yet exist. And that's a hard problem. I'll venture to say that's a math problem, to put those together to figure out what is the optimal company C I can create from the ingredients in companies A and B, assets, supply chains, wherever they might be. Let me just kind of really simplify it in a sort of a mental picture here. If you ran a collection of lemonade stands, and let's say Mark ran a similar collection of lemonade stands, and you put them together and you look at all the locations of your lemonade stands on the map, you'll see that some are sort of interwoven with another. Does it make sense to maybe consolidate a few of those? Does it make sense to have some of these lemonade stands out in the outer bands to close those and maybe reunify that with other lemonade stands? I mean, how do you service the biggest footprint of customers given the number of locations that you have? So just that one sort of simple problem that is presented to you is one that you would solve with models. And so I would envision that you would take all the customers of your lemonade stands, and then you would test the different location scenarios, having this location here or moving this location 5 miles to the east or closing this one and consolidating that one. You would experiment over and over again with the different locations of these lemonade stands until you got to what is the optimal footprint. So that's just kind of a microcosm of all the different decisions that an oil and gas firm would have to make with respect to its operations and its assets and its supply chain and so forth. So, frankly, I don't know how one would do it without models giving you a score as you start to do these experiments with changing these things around. How would you do that without some kind of analytical method giving you a score to tell you, oh, that's better, that's worse, each time you do it?
Yeah, no, I mean, if the lemonade stand problem has that many moving pieces, right? Imagine what the only thing I'm not sure about is, Mark, we have to find out, how did George get access to our secret plans? I mean, now everybody knows about the lemonade stand thing. So, no, it's actually, so what you're describing is there are a lot of moving pieces. There will be a lot of moving pieces. There's various different optimal scenario, or there's an optimal scenario and there's a bunch of other scenarios. And so, moving all these things around and trying all these different approaches. And I'm thinking about, so Aman, I'm coming back to you, and I'm thinking about, you're out there, like, I believe you're out there working sort of in kind of embedded in some of these key critical business processes. And if I were just listening to what George was saying, I would say, holy cow, what is this going to do to my, like, this is going to wreak havoc on all of my processes and operations. You can't just start moving stuff around. So, so to solve that problem, I'm going to set up like this big question for you, and then you're going to have a wonderful answer. But to, it makes me think about, like, back in my early, like back in olden times, my IT consulting days, we had this concept of enterprise architecture. And if you got the right enterprise architecture, it would not just solve like this problem or enable this thing, but it was kind of like a foundation for enabling a whole bunch of different objectives, right? Is there such a thing when it comes to managing the data and the knowledge and kind of everything that's, and the people that are needed to support these processes, while George's models are busy like wreaking havoc on all the parts? Is there a way to approach that isn't, chaos?
Absolutely. I mean, we're, our mindset is to kind of go in there and simplify the process and the entire approach to this M&A. So with that, we go in to make sure we are focusing on the intent for the M&A, which is to increase value. And with that, we define strategy and establish, what is that new organizational structure going to be? We communicate the objectives that are going to play out after that. We create an integration office. So with that, we define like a post-merger integration guiding principles, appoint leaders, and just do a really in-house assessment of where and what the organizations have. So look inside the pantry. What ingredients do you have to work with? And then help the managers set up new teams for success, create integrated synergy baselines. And for that, we build and communicate synergy targets, identify potential integration and synergy initiatives. So, and with those, when those are created, we prioritize which ones need to be hashed out first. So with that, we take phased approaches and just simplify things every step of the way, which is critical, because if you start drinking from the water hose, it's not going to be good for anyone, right? So we take a step back and we actually start simplifying things, kind of looking at the needs assessment, baseline everything, and then just kind of approach it in a very very simple and approach.
Right. So it's not necessarily so scary, right? Like,
No.
So what I'm hearing you say is there's a way of doing this.
Yes.
And it kind of looks like this, and we can all take a breath, because really, coming back to figuring out, back to modeling out and the analytics to say, here's what's the best scenario or the best direction for our company. We know that's what's going to be the most profitable. That's what's going to be the most sustainable. That's the right thing. But now we have to reshape the underpinnings, right, to execute in that new setup. And what you're saying is, it doesn't have to be everybody running around like tearing their hair out. there's a systematic approach, and we can work through that. Mark, I know you're thinking about something. I can tell, like, there's something you're thinking. So you've been in the industry, a long time, and you've seen a lot of stuff. So what are you thinking about as you think through how all this plays out in real life for a company?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I see the same mistakes being made over and over again. One is not understanding the culture of the two companies when you bring them together, right? That's a huge mistake. The other one is sometimes the worker bees are so focused on getting the deal done that they pencil whip a lot of stuff. So when they're doing their due diligence, they do just enough and they don't go deeper. And sometimes going deeper, especially in things like agreements, partnership agreements, the way the business was chartered, all that stuff can uncover stuff that's basically skeletons in the closet. And so if you just pencil whip it, you miss a lot of that sort of stuff. And then if you don't think about the culture of the two companies that you're trying to merge together, that's another place where you can really go, veer out in left field somewhere.
Right. Yeah, culture actually is. I wanted to come around to culture here in a bit, because that's a huge one. Before we do that, maybe let's dig in a little bit on. And George, you mentioned early on that there are tools and things that we can use and technologies that we can use today that make this work better. It also makes me think about. This is an industry where we have a lot of, and I use this term affectionately, we have a lot of baggage, meaning there's a lot of history about things being done in certain ways for certain reasons, and everybody kind of has, it seems like as soon as you come in and you say we're going to do something new, the first thing that you run into is all of the existing, what we call legacy, sometimes not just legacy systems, but legacy ways of working and all of that. What so George, you mentioned tools and technologies that make this better. Talk about that a little bit. Like, what are you seeing as the cure for that legacy problem?
Yeah, so I'll draw on my own experience and having applied models in M&A situations for the last several years. I've done several of them. And there are three technologies in my mind, Michael, that sort of stand out as being extremely useful when you're trying to put companies together. The first is simulation. So a simulation model, simulating a day, week, month in the life of a particular asset or a collection of assets. Once you have that simulation model, how it works, the modern term for this these days is digital twin. You've got this sort of digital replica of a real asset or system that you can now experiment with, and then take that insight and then apply that over to the real asset. That's eminently useful in M&A situations, because in order to put things together, in order to put the puzzle pieces together, you have to understand the characteristics and attributes of each individual puzzle piece and how it could work under a variety of conditions. Simulation modeling is ideal for that. The other technology that I think is very useful is optimization modeling. A mathematical model that will figure out the optimal configuration of some systems. This has been used in the refining industry for many, many years. You've heard LP or linear programs. That's essentially just a form of optimization, but it's not just restricted, of course, to refining. Optimization models can be applied everywhere, and it's where you're trying to find the best configuration of some system under a variety of conditions. So you can test whether a certain change in addition of an asset or addition of a product line changes the way the system needs to be optimized. So optimization is great for sort of day-to-day dispatch and coordination and control of complex assets like the oil and gas industry has to deal with every single day. And the final thing, I think, is something that really ties to what Mark was saying earlier, which is visualization. Mark was talking about the culture, and you really have to understand the culture and what drives different groups and why they feel a certain way about how they approach their jobs. If you build a model of something, let's say I build a simulation model of a major oil and gas facility of some type,
Right.
if I'm able to visualize a day in the life or a week in the life or a month in the life of that, it really starts to communicate what you're trying to do in non-mathematical ways to a broad cross-section of people. I've had situations where I've built models that were of airlines that were viewed by airline pilots. The pilots just happened to also be shareholders in the particular airline, and they were deeply intrigued about how the company was operating and how it would manage its flights day to day. And we were able to show them that without getting into the minutia of all the different calculations by simply allowing them to see the visualization of the airline business and how the leadership team intended to run that. So visualization, oddly, is a key to helping bridge those cultural gaps that Mark was just referring to.
Right, and we can do all of that so much better now. The computing capabilities that we have today enable so much more in that regard that even just a few years ago would have been
Absolutely
very difficult. Yeah. You did mention, so I want to roll back a little bit. You were talking about refineries, Mark, which I know is your is near and dear to you. Mark has a great story about the guy who took him driving around a refinery and showed him what all the parts were. But and sometimes when we talk about M&A, we tend to be preoccupied with the upstream, producers and things like that. But what about, Mark, as I was listening to George talk about these simulations and optimizing, again, it's kind of a similar theme, right? Which is if you're the folks in the refineries, you know that you do things certain ways and you don't like to change a whole bunch of stuff because things blow up, bad things happen. But nonetheless, we have to innovate, right? And we got to drive value, and we have to be agile and adaptable and all these things. So how do you that, and you talked about culture, that culture, how do you bring together this spirit of let's innovate, let's optimize, let's look at all these different scenarios, and let's bring that into real life in something like a refinery operation?
You would pick a refinery, like the one part of the entire industry that doesn't like change.
Yeah, that wasn't by accident, right? Yeah.
So actually there is. So if there's a company called Meridian that's building the Davis refinery up in North Dakota. And so what it took was a vision, a leader, and then buy-in from the bottom up, right? Not from the top down. And they're basically building a refinery to refine one weight of crude. It's totally automated. It's almost zero emissions. And it was literally, they just took the existing idea of refining hydrocarbons to turn it to products. And they said, how can we do it better conceptually? And then they went out and they found partners, right? The process control people, the AI people, the emissions people to come together, and they actually pulled it off. And they're going to do the same thing in the Permian. So it can be done even in the oldest of old-fashioned parts of our industry, which is refining.
Right, where we haven't actually built a new one in 50 years. Well, we built that one.
Since the 70s for fuel refineries. Yeah. So it can be done. It takes, like I said, it takes vision, leadership, and then buy-in from the entire company to be able to be more agile.
So that's it. that's all you need.
It takes way more than that, but that's where it needs to start.
No, even that alone sometimes is difficult. Okay, so I'm thinking about how we talked about where to start, and now we're coming through we're kind of in the guts of it, and Aman, I haven't forgotten about you because you made a bold claim at the beginning of this kind of thread, and you said, we have a way of doing this, don't worry, it's going to be fine. So now now that we've heard about all of the rigmarole, when you come out on the other side, what is, if I'm a person who is working, leading these processes or involved in these operations, what does my world start to look like as we come out on the other side of this, and we've followed your prescription for how to do things in an orderly fashion?
Well, I mean, kind of going to Mark's comment earlier about vision and leadership, and it kind of starts from top down. So if the intent has been secured with the executive team and they're very steadfast on exactly what they want, it's very easy to implement. But if they're not ready for the change, and nor are they ready for the design mechanism of what they want for both the companies that are being merged, then it's very difficult to implement.
Sure. Yeah. So let's pretend that that they did. I want this to be like the positive, hopeful part of the conversation.
Yes.
So let's pretend that we did all these things, and we had the leadership, we had the buy-in, we had the right sort of optimal thing. What is a day in my life look like now in this new world? Is it different? Is it the same? Am I, how do things change when we come out? If we do it right, what does my world look like when we come out on the other side? Do you get to see that at all with your clients?
Yes, for the most part, it is more with, initiatives around, is there emphasis on employee wellness, right? So if there are any charters along those lines, if there's growth of current culture, or, if there's been, the company's provided meaning to new roles, or is there a better responsibility that's been provided, creating goals, right? Encourage positivity and fostering social interactions. There's a better collaboration, and there are different meetings where both the companies are coming together in their cross-training initiatives. And then most importantly, listening to the company. So, bringing teams together and having kind of like your kumbaya meetings, and, having those around table discussions of just kind of listening to what your new company people are saying and what are they wanting to be heard for.
Right.
So,
right.
yeah.
So you mentioned collaboration. And this is good because we're getting into the culture topic now.
Right.
I've heard this term used, a culture of collaboration, which sounds a little new and trendy, maybe, but that's really what you're describing about. But Mark, like, okay, you've been in the industry a long time. Listening, like, does that sound like the people that we know that work kind of in the nuts and bolts of these things? Like, we're listening to each other and we really want to understand what everybody needs out of this. I mean, are we ready for that? Is the industry ready for that type of approach? I mean, it works in other places. So can we do that?
So number one, we don't have a choice. We're headed in that direction, right? This new younger workforce is way more collaborative than our generation, right? Our generation, and you've been hearing about the great crew change for what, 20 years now, folks. Yeah. It's not happening, but at the same time, right. Our generation is retiring, right? And so this new younger workforce is coming in. They think about things differently. They want different things out of their employer, right? So our generation was, I'll work a job that I don't really care for too much for 20 years, and then I'll enjoy life after, right? This new younger workforce doesn't want to do that. They want to enjoy life now. They want to make a difference now. I don't care how much you pay them. They want different experiences. At the same time, they're also much more agile, much more collaborative, much more nimble, much more tech savvy. And so it's happening to the industry now. I see it right now. I mean, I see it happening with a lot of the service companies doing things that you would have never thought of. Who would have ever thought Schlumberger would sell wireline tools on Facebook? Are you kidding me? But they're doing it. Or they're renting their own tools to their competitors, right? That's not somebody like you and me making that decision. So as these mergers and acquisitions happen, a lot of these new younger workers, and I say younger, they're in mid-level management now, right? The millennials. So they're making things happen in a way that we never could make happen. And I think it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, no, that is true. It is. It's kind of happening right before our eyes, really. We see just so many companies embracing new ways of doing things, and I think up until now it's been in some of the safer areas of the business where we don't have to worry about things blowing up, but it's moving in to maybe the more complex areas. So we come back around to the complexity of all. George, I know you're probably thinking about, you got something that you're thinking about right now as you're listening to us. Also, I know you now have the investor perspective, right? Because you're working for you're working with an investment company. So what are you thinking as you listen to this?
Well, I think what Mark was saying is absolutely true. This was an industry that really needed new thinking, new kind of fresh thinking. That's not to denigrate the knowledge and experience that we have from, the prior generation of leaders. That's brought us, a great, almost incomparable kind of industry that's created a tremendous amount of value. However, this is an industry that does tend to rest on its traditions, and with the new generation coming in, they're just thinking about things completely differently. I know my children, who are millennials, just think differently, learn differently, act differently from the way me and my peers did, and I think that's a wonderful thing that we've got. It's sort of refreshing the industry a bit. The challenge that they're going to have, of course, is that complexity, but they're meeting that challenge with equal doses of technology. I think technology plays, and it's not all about the technology, but it plays a very important role in grappling with a very complex business that's going to change in a lot of ways. I mean, the very name that we use for this is oil and gas. Well, it's going to be a complement of a lot of different kinds of energies. In fact, a lot of people are starting to talk about the industry not as the oil and gas industry. They talk about it as the energy industry. And I think that's a better moniker for this industry, because it's not all, it's going to be sort of maybe hybrid of hydrocarbons with other things, certainly over the next decade. So it's going to be interesting to watch. I feel really privileged to have a front row seat here in Houston with the rest of you to kind of watch how this is going to transition. But there's going to be a couple of markers that are going to be with us for a while, and that is, greater technology, greater amounts of automation, greater amounts of use of tools like the kinds of tools that Aman produces, and ESG. There's going to be a much stronger ESG focus for the industry, I believe, going forward. Again, the younger generation that's coming into leadership positions in oil and gas, or energy, I should say, are much more predisposed to thinking about ESG guidelines to infuse into their work. So it's going to be the same good, vibrant industry. I'm optimistic, but it's just going to be different. It's going to be very different from the way we see it today.
Yeah, that's it's funny that it seems like no matter what topic we start with these days at a high level, whatever big industry topic we begin with, we always end up talking about a very similar set of things, which is changing the way we work, embracing new ways of doing things, respecting the traditions, but kind of breaking from, like, all of this. We sort of arrive at that, and we also, and the sort of the continuation of that is because we need to, because we've got a younger generation, and we need to think about sustainability, and et cetera, all those things you just said, George. So it makes me, and this is probably a good time, because we're kind of into the final 15 minutes here. So for our audience, if you've got questions, comments, things like that, type them into whatever thing you're looking at, and if all of the internet gods are with us, we will see your comments coming through, and we can answer those questions. But Aman, it makes me wonder, like, when you're out there working alongside people, is this what you see? Like, sort of, no matter whether it's mergers and acquisitions or whether it's some other broad strategic objective, do you end up really kind of like working out the same problems and solving the same, and kind of making the same types of improvements that ultimately serve all these objectives? That just popped into my head. This one wasn't on the script, so I'm just going to throw that one at you. And
no worries. I mean, more or less, right? So at the end of the day, we're trying to make things better for a company. So it could be a customized approach. We walk in, we analyze what the situation is, and we're trying to think outside the box, right? So whatever the problem on hand might be, we're trying to give them a customized solution. So at the end of the day, it is really, we're looking at this scenario, we're doing a gap analysis and figuring out what they have in-house and trying to produce results from that. So more or less, yes, it's similar, but very different solutions. Yeah.
So that's what people ought to try to be doing, whether you're there doing it with them or they're doing it. The objective is to do the things that you talked about. I'm going to do a quick question check, see if anybody seeing any questions that I'm not seeing. Are we good so far? Mark, what? George was giving some comments on the future of the industry looks bright. I know that you share that overall perspective. In fact, that's a big thing that we try to do at OGGN is try to maintain the positive energy in the industry. And Mark, I know you're reading all the headlines and you keep track of who's buying who and what's coming out the other side. Do you think that all of this activity, this transactional activity, are we going to come out stronger and better on the other side of all this?
100%, absolutely, right? 100%. You look at something as simple as like the iron roughneck, right? It took us 20 years from the time it was invented to actually adopt it. But you know what? Now we don't measure a roughneck's experience by how many fingers he's missing. Not that long ago, that's how we measured their effectiveness, right? And I know it's kind of a brutal example, but our industry is headed toward the future. The future is bright for our industry. We're going through an enormous amount of change, and change always scares people. But I have this conversation with young petroleum engineers all the time. They're worried about the future of petroleum engineering. I go, no. I don't think you realize nobody's going to school right now to become a petroleum engineer. You're sitting on a gold mine, right? Your future is super bright. You may have to learn some big data analytics, right? Something that petroleum engineers traditionally didn't do, but the future of our industry is awesome.
Yeah, I agree. I think that a lot of these moves that we're seeing right now, in spite of the fact that it might cause, so for the people on the ground who are trying to make things work and trying to show that value after these various transactions and new entities are formed, it's not going to be we're painting a very nice picture here, right? And if you just do what we're saying, then everything's going to go beautifully. But it doesn't really go that way, and it is hard work, and sometimes people get worn out. But I think I think that the moves that are being made to reshape these businesses and reshape the portfolios and kind of create new business models, all of that has to, this industry is full of a lot of really smart people. And if you look at what it's accomplished, powering the world for the last 100 and something years, that was no small feat. So I gotta believe there'll probably be some missteps, but we gotta come out looking stronger on the other side of this. And George, I know I mentioned that you're in the investor community now. Are they as positive as we are on all this? Do they see good things happening?
I think it's a complicated question there, Michael. I think what we're seeing now, and yes, I'm part of Validor Partners. So although I'm a data scientist and I work on making companies better, I also work on my parent company's portfolio companies that they buy or are looking to buy. So I do get to see it from an investor perspective. And there's still some great valuable assets to acquire out there in what we even see as the traditional oil and gas industry. But we are in what I think an evolution. Every industry faces this sort of worse before better cycle. The automotive industry faced this, the airline industry faced this, the pharmaceutical industry faced this. You come along and you're very comfortable, and we're pretty comfortable up until about 2014, and then things got really uncomfortable, and we still haven't completely adjusted from the whipsaw then, and we have COVID 6 years later that also whipsawed the industry. So we're being pushed back and forth, and I think the industry is trying to find its way. This is the we're trying to find our way phase of things. But once we do find our way, I'm with Mark here. I'm still very optimistic about the prospects of the industry because of the capital base that we have, because the experience base that we have, because the ecosystem that comprises oil and gas today is not three big firms. It's many, many, many firms spread out doing their own independent decisions. I think that's healthy for this industry. So for investors are being very cautious, and they're not throwing money at assets like they may have done in the past. They're making sure that those assets are valuable. There is an ESG umbrella over all of this too.
Right, of course.
The industry is trying to attract capital, the cheaper institutional capital by improving their ESG record. So there's that's going on as well. But it's a bit of a sort of murky, mixed, uncertain picture now, and I think will be for about the next few years. But what I'm also seeing is evidence of the industry, at least seeking to stabilize around a certain set of core concepts, like a major oil company that I won't name has come out with a plan, and they're essentially going to broaden their portfolio to include lots of other energies and lots of other fuels, including some renewables and battery power, et cetera, putting lots of their resources there. So you're going to see these industries sort of morph into, and maybe even not use the word oil or gas in their name anymore, and kind of lean toward being an energy company. I think it's going to take a few years for that to settle its way out. But once it does, now you've got a much more stable base for investors to come back into that industry. Again, as many other industries have done in the past, there's been this period of transition, investors coming back into the industry and then providing the capital to make the transition, which is going to be a decade-long process to make that transition happen. Yeah.
You mentioned that before too, calling ourselves energy. It was just a few years ago that would have got you thrown out of a conference room if you were there trying to sell something to these guys, right? If you'd have rolled up and said, "Oh, well, we want to show you what we're doing for the energy industry," they would have said, "Thanks. They'll validate your parking on the way out." And
right.
But we're embracing it. So that's really good. I think we are winding down, and I am out of pre-formulated thoughts. So I'll just kind of throw it open out there. Anything else that we want to toss into the discussion before we wind up? Just jump right in there.
Yeah, so I actually think the M&A activity that we've seen so far has been very healthy. It's one of the things that people don't always aren't always able to wrap their head around, is that sometimes an acquisition is a savior for the company that has been acquired, right? And even the really hard companies, if you have good leadership, they can pull it together. I remember when Exxon bought Mobil, and I was like, there is no way, because those are two radically different cultures,
very different, yeah.
But you know what? Because they had good leadership and a good M&A team, they actually pulled it together. So if those two companies can merge and be successful in the future, I think as long as you have a good team helping you with your merger acquisition, I think anyone can be successful. At the same time, if you don't do your due diligence, if you're not a clear communicator, if you don't pay attention to the finance, the deal can go sour really quick.
Yeah. That's we have another one of those culture clashes nowadays too, right? I mean, OGGN and Anadarko are two very good different companies, and they're in a tough world right now, but they're hanging in, and it's looking better. So so Mark, you mentioned the kind of doing the due diligence, figuring things out in advance, and that reminds me of something at one point, George, and now I can't remember if you said this in this actual conversation or it was a different one, but there is, when you talk about this modeling and the simulations and stuff, we can do that even early on, right? That really begins before the deal comes together.
Yeah, we've spent most of the time talking about after the deal, and that is certainly one of the more dominant use cases for this modeling is, hey, you've decided to come together. Now, how do we stitch the two companies together? But there's another use case, as you point out, prior to the deal even forming. And some of the more forward thinking companies that I've had conversations with are actually speculating. Okay, what if we have three merger candidates out there, A, B, and C. Let's imagine that we merge with A. What would be the implications there? Let's now imagine that we merge with B. Okay, what would the implications be there? So it can actually help even years before you actually have a transaction. When you're contemplating or conceiving of a transaction, what is the best transaction overall for the longevity of the company and the value of the company? Again, some forward-thinking companies are doing this, literally sitting down and modeling. If this were Exxon, many years ago before they merged with Mobil, is Mobil the right partner to merge with, or could there be others, or could there be others that we merge even after we merge with Mobil, and so forth? All of those plausible futures could not only be contemplated, but could be analyzed.
Yeah, right. The difference is Exxon and Mobil had to do it on an abacus. They had to figure out all that. Now we have better ways. It also makes me think, though, I got to believe that in this sort of greasing the skids in advance, right? Like the pre-work, I have to believe also, like, for example, you must be able, like, when you're working with people in advance, is there such a thing as kind of starting to prep the culture, right? And trying to work with people so that you're not just coming in after and everybody's like running around but
right.
you're working with them in advance to prep the culture to be more effective as you go through it. Is that a thing? I just thought of that.
It is actually. I think you read my mind there, because you can do all those part of your due diligence, right? So not only are you assessing that for your value, but also you can start prepping that before you go in. So and just, embracing knowledge is one thing that obviously I'm biased about, but knowledge management it's important because it boosts the organization's decision-making abilities, right? So even if you're bringing in two companies together or more, it just boosts and elevates your ability to make decisions. So making sure the employees have access to overall expertise within the organization, and we can definitely do that prep work in advance, absolutely.
Excellent.
And building a smarter workforce.
Building a smarter workforce. I love that. Somebody needs to have that as their tagline. Is that the SparkThought tag? Because you might want to.
It is one of ours, but I'm sure we don't have a trademark. It's out there. That's
excellent. Yeah, excellent. So that I think is a great place to wrap up. Building a smarter workforce, and things are looking bright. I want to thank our panelists for being here today. Aman Venkat, from the CEO of SparkThought, George Danner, who is many things to many people, and Mark LaCour, who is the editor-in-chief of the Oil and Gas Global Network. I do remember. Usually, I just call you the chief cook and bottle washer, but yeah, excellent. Thank you guys for being here. Fantastic conversation. I think we have a successful pilot, so we'll do more of these. Also, want to thank Power Advocate for sponsoring this series. We do love our sponsors at OGGN, because without them, there is no us. And of course, as always, thank you to our friends at Pirate Syndicate, Russ Johns and his team, and in particular Tracy, who was running the controls today behind the scenes and making all this go perfectly. That's going to wrap it up. Make sure that you look. There's going to be another one of these coming in this series, so join us for the next one and all of the other oil and gas global network live streams that are coming at you now. Keep a lookout for those. You can find them on our LinkedIn page, and all the events that get posted and all the things that are happening. So keep an eye out, and we will see you next time.